All right, I think I'm gonna start now. So basically this week we're gonna be covering Java and Python, more specifically like the basics of both of these languages. And then next week is gonna be the last lesson or last week of this programming languages section. We're gonna be doing some sort of project that we haven't like fully decided on yet. So hopefully everyone has Java and Python downloaded and set up already. And if you don't, you can just follow along with like an online code editor for now. So Josh, can you send links in the chat? So hopefully you do have everything downloaded. So if not, just use those websites. So I think we're going to start off with the syntax differences between Java and Python first. So as you can see, Java has much longer lines and Python has considerably shorter lines of code. So this causes Python to have smaller files that take less space. Java also requires semicolons and curly braces at the end of every line, and curly braces are used like for functions and methods. On the other hand, Python doesn't use semicolons or curly braces. Instead, there's more usage of colons, and indentation is mandatory, as shown by this visual up here. And also, Java requires you to declare the type of variable, while Python has like more dynamic variables. And then in Java, for a one-line comment, you just want to use two forward slashes. And in Python, we use a hashtag instead. So overall, Java is a bit more complicated and Python's a bit simpler and easier. So these are table of contents for this week's meeting. So for these like programming topics, we're going to be covering print function, then variables slash primitive types, arithmetic operators, if statements, loops, and lastly arrays. So if you have any questions, just feel free to message us in the chat, and then we'll probably answer them as we teach. So first off, we're going to start off with the print function. So to do so, we're going to be creating a simple hello world program by first creating a file, then writing the program, and then lastly running the program. So to do this in Java, we're going to first open up VS Code. So hopefully you guys have this open. And when you open, it might look something like this. And so a simple way for us to do this is we can open our file explorer and then we can open a folder. If you don't have a folder created for like these lessons or something, you can just open your file explorer and then create a folder somewhere. So for me, I'm gonna click programming I'm just gonna click programming. There's a folder I created a bit beforehand, and shoot, it didn't open. So it should open for you. So once you select your folder, um, so basically we're going to create a new file. You can do this from many different ways. For me, I'm just gonna hit the new file button up here and we'll call this lesson1.java. So basically, as you see, depending on your VS Code, sometimes it might not happen, but for me, it just automatically gave me the public class lesson one text. If you don't have that, you should add that. And then we also need to add a main method every time we create a Java class. So each time we're going to do public static void main and then parentheses, string, args, and then brackets, and then curly braces. So basically that's our main method where all of our code is going to be run. All you have to do is just memorize this line and use it every single time, and you'll get better at it with practice. So then to print in Java, we do system.out.print line and in parentheses, and make sure to add your semicolon. And inside of parentheses, we're going to put the string that we're going to print. So make sure you put quotations, and we're going to print out hello world. So, and then we need to save our file. By doing so, we can simply do Control S. And then to run our code, there's a big run button on the top right. So we can hit that and it should output in the terminal. If you're like me and your terminal doesn't output anything, that's fine. You can cancel it by doing Control C and then typing Java, then the file name, which is Java lesson1.java, and it should print out hello world. So now I believe Josh is going to show you how to do it in Python.
Yeah, cool. So now Python is very similar. You will open your folder just like the Java side and create a file in it. And if you haven't done this already, you should download Python from the marketplace, which is located here, and also download Python interpreter from python.org. But I'm assuming that you guys already did that, so we can start now. To print hello world is very simple. You just type in print parentheses, quotation marks, hello world. Unlike Java, you don't need any of the class declarations, public static, void main, string args. So this is all you need, and you can also hit the top right run corner, and down here in the terminal, it should print out hello world. Cool. Okay, so now the next lesson we have is variables and primitive types. So simply put, variables, they store certain values for future use. They use memory cells, as you can see in this visual graphic on the top right, to store the variables. And you can also put them in and you can take them out. And you can also use variables to refer to such values and be able to manipulate them. And in Java, you have to first declare the variable type. So over here, this is sort of a Java format where you have to declare the type and then assign a value to it. And this is another visual representation of what a variable looks like. You can put data in, store it in a variable, and you can take it out for later use. Now, different types of data types. We're going to be using Java since Python you don't declare. So Java, we have byte, or actually, you can skip all these parts. Main parts you need to know is integer. So integer stores an integer number. So 1, 2, 3, 4, that's an integer number. Float is the other one you know. Oh, actually, you know, double is the other one you know. Double stores a decimal number. So if you have 5.5, 3.25, those are double values. There's also a Boolean. Boolean stores a true or false value. So it's binary, true, false. Character stores a character, as you would assume. So A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 9, some ASCII symbol, etc. And there's also one more type. It's not a primitive type, but instead it is sort of like a collection of characters, and that would be called a string. And passing it back to Eric.
All right, so we're going to create a couple of variables here inside our Java file. So first off, let's create an integer. So we're going to do int my int is equal to 5. And then now we're also going to create a string, and we're going to call that my string. So let's do string my string is equal to, and then put quotations, and we're just going to call it greeting, and then a semicolon. And then we're going to create a Boolean. Boolean is basically a true or false statement. So we're going to call it my Boolean, and we're going to set it to true. And then we're going to quickly print out the value of each variable. To do so, don't put any quotations and just put the name of the variable as we declared it earlier. All right, so when we save our file now and then when we run it, we should get hello world. Oh shoot, that won't work. So when we save our file and then we run it, we should get hello world, which was from our first line. And then we'll get the outputs of the values of the next three variables that we just created, which are 5, greeting, and true. So basically, we can also change the value of these variables. To do so, simply just declare the variable, but don't put like int or string. Instead, just set it to something else. So for example, we'll set let's set my int to 3 instead of 5, and then my string can be by, and then my boolean will now be equal to false. So now when we save and we run this file, we'll get 3 different outputs on the bottom. So you see now we get 3 by and false. That's because we update the values of the variables in between.
Now for Python, you don't have to declare what variable type it is. You could simply give it a name. So we'll call it my variable and equals anything you want. So in this case, we could start with an integer and that's 5. So now if you print my variable, we'll get the number 5. And also what's different about Python is that since you didn't declare a type in the beginning, you don't actually have to create you could switch the type of the variable. So now if we want my variable to suddenly store a string instead of a number, we can change it to a string. So like goodbye. And now if we run it, you can see it changes from 5 to goodbye without having to redeclare a new variable. And this works the same for Boolean as well. You can now change it to a Boolean. And it'll print false.
So now we're going to be looking at arithmetic operators. So we're going to be looking over roughly 12 different operators. So we first have very basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and modulus. If you don't know, modulus basically is the same as remainder. So for example, 5 mod 2 is basically equal to 1 because 2 goes into 5 twice with a remainder of 1. And then we also have increment and decrement, or plus, plus, minus, minus. Those basically increase or decrease by 1. And then we have our compound assignment operators. So we have the addition compound assignment operators, the compound subtraction, multiplication, division, and compound modulo assignment operator. So basically, a compound assignment operator assigns the result of the arithmetic operation to the original variable. So if we take a look at this graphic, and we assume the variable c is equal to 3, so then c plus equal to, or which is the addition assignment operator, basically c plus equal to 7 is the same thing as c equals c plus 7. And because 3 plus 7 is equal to 10, c gets assigned the value of 10. So now this will make some more sense as we just like code it really quick. So we're going to be working with my int. So let's do my int plus equal to, right, which is the compound addition assignment operator, and we'll put 3. So this should give us the value of 6. And then we're going to do my int minus minus and then semicolon. So that's the decrement operator. So that will simply subtract by 1. So now if we save and run the file, you see that we get 5 because 3 plus 3 was 6, then minus 1 is equal to 5. And then lastly, we can actually add parts to a string, which is basically called concatenation. So my string plus equal to, and then let's do parentheses space high, and then semicolon. So in case you don't know what concatenation means, it basically appends this string onto the end of the original string. So now when I run the program, we'll see that our string is not just by and it's not just high, it's both is by high because we have an addition assignment operator which basically concatenates it to the string.
Yeah, so in Python, the arithmetic operators are very similar to Java. So just a quick debrief for this part, you would set a to the double 5, and then you add 2 to it, so that's 7 now, because remember, plus equals is the same as a equals a plus 2. They're basically the same thing. So now it becomes 7. 7 minus 3 is 4, 4 times 5 is 20, and 20 divided by 2 is 10. So now if you print out a, you will get 10. And also modulo works the same way too. 10 mod 3 is 1, since 10 divided by 3 gives you a remainder of 1. And now concatenating also works very similarly, but remember, you cannot concatenate a number to a string. You can only concatenate strings to strings. So for example, if you try to concatenate the number a, which in this case is storing 1, to a string, let's say hello, then if you try to run it, it will return an error, and it'll tell you that you cannot combine float and string. So float is pretty much the same thing as double. It's a decimal number. So to solve this, you would have to convert a from the float to a string by doing that. And now if we try to run it, it'll work. 1.0, hello. Next up, if statements. So if statements are useful for when you want a piece of code to only execute a piece of code when a condition is met. So in this flowchart, you can see it checks the condition. If the condition is true, it'll run something. If it's false, it won't run it. It'll just move on. And you can also, you can add on to this and make like if, else if. So else if would only trigger and check the condition if the first one is already false. If it's true, it'll run the first path. If it's false, it'll check the else if. And you can string a lot of else ifs and add on. And the final statement will be else. Else would only trigger and run its code if all the other conditions are already declared as false. So if this is false, it'll check this. If this is false, it'll get here and run the last one.
All right, so to do this in Java, this is what our format looks like. So basically a simple if statement is if parentheses, this is our condition. So right now our condition is if my int equals to 5. The reason why we have two equal signs is because in Java, when we want to compare the equality, we use two equal signs because one equal sign is like reserved for assigning values to the variables. So we're comparing if my int equals 5. And if it does, we're going to print out the value of my int as well as a string beforehand that says my int and colon. So if I run this, at the very bottom, we'll see my int colon 5, and that's because this is true. So now we can add an else if statement. So it's very similar formatting. And now we're going to do else if my boolean and we're just going to put my boolean by itself. And then lastly, we're just going to have an else statement. So in Java, when you put a boolean inside a condition and you don't put like is equal to true or equal to false, it automatically assumes if it's comparing it to be true. So my boolean right now is this formatting is basically shorthand for my boolean equals to true. But this is a bit shorter. So now basically if my boolean is true, we're going to print out a line that says my int is not equal to 5 and my boolean is true. And then if both of those conditions are false, we're going to print out my int is not equal to 5 and my boolean is false. So then above the if statement, we're going to increment my int by 1. We're using the plus plus because we don't want it to equal 5 anymore. So now when we run our program, we get the last option, and that's because my int is equal to 6, so the first one doesn't happen. My boolean is false, so the second one doesn't happen. And because of that, we get the output my int is not equal to 5 and my boolean is false. If we were to set my boolean to true, then we'll get the second output. And that's basically it for if statements for Java.
And now for Python, we have this word down here. So instead of curly braces like you saw for Java, Python instead use indentation to distinguish what is inside the if statement. So you can see at the end of the if statement, there's a little colon down here. And the line that will go inside the if statement will be indented. So every time you type something inside the indentation, that will be under the if statement and will trigger if the condition is true. So now I'm going to delete that. And now remember how if statements work, it checks the condition, then runs the first part. So running this, it would check B against the number 3 and realize that. Oh, wait, shoot, I forgot something. So in Python, you cannot use else if. Instead, you use elif, which is basically else if combined into one word. So that is the proper way to do an else if statement in Python. So I could see down here, since 3 is equal to 3, it will trigger this code to run, and that will print out that 3 is equal to 3. And since the first condition is met, it skips all the other conditions. Now if we change it to 4, it'll check the condition against the first one, see that it's false, and then it'll check the second condition and see that it is true. So now I'll run the second piece of code down here. 4 is equal to 4. And now if we have a number that will fail and make all the conditions false, it'll trigger the else statement. The else statement will trigger if every other condition is false. So since 10 is not equal to 3 and 10 is not equal to 4, then everything will be false and it'll print that all conditions are false.
All right, so now we're going to be taking a look at loops. So we're going to be going over two very simple loops, the for loop and the while loop. The for loop iterates through a collection or range and is much better than the while loop if you know the number of iterations needed to perform. So it's also the syntactically prettier method, so which is why it's like more used and more preferred. And on the other hand, a while loop loops until a condition is false, which makes it very useful during unpredictable interactions where there isn't a range to iterate over. So for example, if you imagine like a person sleeping, we don't know when that person will wake up. So we can just do while and have a Boolean that is like when the person is sleeping. However, if we're like creating an alarm and we want to set the alarm to like ring in 8 hours, we would probably do something like a for loop and iterate 8 times over each time 1 hour because we know the number of times we need to iterate. So lastly, they're both very similar and we know this because we can rewrite the while loop as a for loop. Um, so in Java, for loop, the syntax is for parentheses, then curly braces. And inside the parentheses, we have like three different statements. So first, we're going to declare a variable called I, which is most conventional in the for loop. Then a semicolon, then our condition, which is I is less than my int. And then we're going to increment I. So basically what this means is we've created a variable that lives inside this for loop called I, and we set it to be 0. And if I is less than my int, we will loop and do whatever is in here. And then after each iteration, we're going to increment by 1 and then keep on looping until the condition is false, basically. So for our for loop, we're just going to print out the value of I. So when we run this, we get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because we start at 0 and we loop all the way till 6 because my int is currently equal to 6. The reason why 6 is not outputted is because when I is equal to 6, the loop doesn't run because by that time the condition is not true anymore. So the loop has been exited. So now we're going to create a while loop. So the while loop syntax is very similar, except inside the condition, you only have like one statement instead of three. So for our while loop to work, we're going to actually create a counter above. So int counter equals 0. And then while counter is, and then actually we're going to put a Boolean in here. So while my Boolean, shoot, is that how you spell Boolean? All right, while my Boolean, and then we're gonna put an exclamation mark in front. If you're unfamiliar with the exclamation mark, basically that means not or false. So this statement right here basically means while my Boolean is false. And then inside we're going to increment the counter first, and then we're gonna have an if statement. So if counter is greater than 4, then my Boolean is going to be set to true, which is going to exit us out of the loop the next time. And then lastly, we're going to print out the value of counter. So as you can see, it's very similar to a for loop, but you can just view it as a for loop with extra steps. We also get the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 output as the for loop, except there's like a lot more text here, and that's about it.
And now here for Python, instead of putting putting parentheses for a for loop and having the split into three parts, the semicolons, it is structured something like this, where it goes for I in range 5. And as you can expect, that will print the word high 5 times. And instead of putting 5, you can also put, let's say, if you want to start, oh wait, my bad, hang on. And if you want to see what I is set to, you will realize that just like Java, it runs 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and stops before it hits the number 5. Another thing to take note of is that you can set where I should start at by putting a number in front of the 5. So here it will run from 2 all the way up to 5, but stop before it hits 5. So 2, 3, 4. Instead of numbers, you can also put down how long a word is by doing like this. So you can see that my word is 7 characters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 characters long. So now if you run it, it'll print 7 times, 0 to 6. And now the different thing about the for loop is you don't actually have to put range, but when you don't put range, it'll iterate through whatever is in here. So if it's later on, if we're going to learn arrays, it's going to iterate through an array. In this case, it is a string. So what it's going to iterate through is each individual character in the string. So you can see it goes through 7, then the space, then CHARS. And now for a while loop, it is very similar as well. You have while, you have the condition. So we can also make a Boolean. So, well, my Boolean. And we'll declare a my Boolean beforehand. So while my Boolean, this time instead of a exclamation mark with in front of it, which basically inverts it, we're just going to take it out and try a different way. So this is while my Boolean is true, it will run. So as long as my Boolean is still true, it will run. So now we can have something that says like if count is greater than 4, then we'll set my Boolean to false. And we'll also make a counter. And at the end, just like always, you have to increment or you will hit an infinite loop. So we can increment count by 1. And now when you run it, oh wait, I didn't have a quick function. And we can also print it out to make sure that works. So print, let's say, my Boolean. You can see that we'll do this. It'll print true 5 times, and it'll print out the Boolean that declares it as false. And since as soon as it hit false, it will check again, and it won't run anymore since the condition is now false. And for the last topic we have is arrays. So an array is a group of related data values called elements that are grouped together. The grouped elements will contain the same type of data, whether it be primitive data types or objects. And arrays have many functions associated with them to manipulate and obtain data from them. So here you can see this is a visual representation of what an array will look like. This array, you have these individual boxes will be called elements, and this one has a total of 8 elements. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And to call upon an array, you will do it like this. And remember, an array always starts at an index number 0. So even though it has 8 elements, it will stop at element number 7 since the first one is called 0 and not 1. That also means if you try to find element number 8 and you put the number 8 for an index, you will get an error since that number does not, that element does not exist. It's off the array, and you'll get like an array out of bound, index out of bound error. And you can also, since you can put anything into an array, you can also put an array inside an array. So that will be called a 2D array. So here we have a picture of a 2D array. And 2D arrays, you can see this is an array. It's Java format, so it has braces. And this is the bigger array. So this array contains 2 arrays that contains numbers. And if you want to visualize it, you could look at it this way, where you have the first array is the top one, the second array is the bottom. So the row will represent the index in the big array, and the column itself will represent the index in the small array. And how you will call upon them is you have to use two square brackets. So instead of here, you see the index is put inside 1 square bracket. So since you have technically 2 index, one for the big array and one for the small array, you will need 2 index. So this is the pattern that you will see to if you want using 2D arrays. You can also do 3D arrays, 4D arrays, an array of classes, and so forth. So they're just storing a group of similar data.
So we're running a bit short of time. So this is basically an example that I've just coded in. So as you can see from our first line, this is basically how we declare and initialize an array in Java. There are multiple different ways you can do this, but this is just a simple method. You can do whichever you're more familiar with. So basically, we've created an integer array that's called my array, and it's a blank array of length 10 because we put the 10 here. And then we set the first two elements because it's a zero index array and it starts at zero. So the first two elements are set to equal to one. And then we print out the value of the first two elements, which is one. And then we have a for loop here, which starts at two and it goes to myArray.length, which is basically 10. It's a way for us to grab the length of this array. And then we increment the I. So basically what this for loop is doing is creating a Fibonacci sequence. In case you guys don't know what that is, basically it's where the sum is where each number is the sum of the previous two numbers. So basically my array of I, which starts at 2. So for example, my array of 2 would be equal to my array of 2 minus 1, which is 1, plus my array of I minus 2, which is 0. So my array of 2 would be equal to 2, and it's going to print out the value of my array of I. So basically, this is going to print out a Fibonacci sequence of length 10. So if we run our code, we should see that we get 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55. And that's basically an example of an array. So now I'm gonna give it over to Josh, and after Josh shows how an array works, I'm gonna show you guys a bit about our HackerRank contest that we have coming up.
Anyway, so here we have, this is it's going to do the same thing as Eric's piece of code, but it's will be in Python. So here we create an array of two values. Since in Python, you don't declare an array of predetermined size. Instead, the size will be able to change as you go along. So in this case, we start with an array of two, and you can set them all to one. So this is how you would set an array and index an array. So index 0, index 1 will be the first two elements. Then for I in range of 2 and 10, you remember it goes from 2 all the way to the number 9. We can append, which will add on to the end of the array. So before we have an array of 2, now once you append, you will put into the third element and then the fourth element and so forth. So add on to the end of the array. And you'll be setting the value, the data inside that certain element to be the previous two combined. So that will also be the Fibonacci sequence. You have 1, 1, the next one will be 2, then 3, then 5. And now to print it out, you can do it this way. And in this remember module, it checks whether it's even or not, since it's dividing by 2 and checking the remainder. And you can also, instead of putting a number for the index number, you can also put in a variable that stores a number. So here the count will increment, so which means that it will put in the increasing number into initial values, which allows you to reuse the piece of code. And just one thing that I should also point out is comments. So in Python, there's single line and block commenting. The single line comments will start with a hashtag. Block comments will have 3 quotation marks at the beginning and the end of the certain chunk. So this entire part is all commented out. As for Java, the single line comments are 2 slashes, and then that will be a comment. You can't tell it here because it's Python. And for Java, multi-line comment will be a slash and then a star, and ending with a star and a slash. And this will be a block comment for Java. Oh, and just a quick run to show that it works. You can see it prints out the Fibonacci sequence as well as whether the values are even or odd.
All right, so it's around 1:11 right now, so we are a bit behind of time. So we'll go on for like a couple more minutes because we guys want you to show where all of these like practice problems will be. So basically, we created a custom HackerRank. So if you guys can go to bit.ly/comsci-HackerRank, which I'm gonna send that in the chat right now. So that should take you to the same link here. If it doesn't, let me know. So basically, this is where you should see. Basically, this is a custom like contest challenge that we've created. So you guys should click sign up here. And if you aren't logged in, you're gonna have to log in. So I'm gonna be creating a fake account as usual. All right, so once you sign up and enter the contest, you're gonna see two challenges because we've had two challenges so far. So start off with the is each even challenge. So basically, this is what Josh just showed. But you can, if you're new, gives you the tutorial. So this is like the problem statement. It gives you what you're trying to do, sample, input, output, the input format, and then this is the code editor. So this is where we're gonna be coding. You can choose your language, Java or Python. You only have to finish a problem in one language, and then you can have discussions, post questions there. But it's gonna be better if you use our Discord actually. And then you can run your code against like a certain amount of test cases, and then you can submit your code, which checks your code against all of the test cases. You have like unlimited submits and run code, so you guys don't have to worry about like using these sparingly. Um, so basically, uh, we're gonna full screen this. I'm just gonna run through this question really quickly. So it says determine if each number in a Fibonacci array of length 10 is even or odd. So if you guys remember from what Josh just did, it's basically the exact same thing. So the input format is an array called my array that's length 10 with index 0 and 1 equal to 1. So as you can see, this is already pre-coded in for you. It's created an array. It's given the first two as length of 1. So if you guys remember, I'll just do this really quickly, just to show an example of how the HackerRank works. So first, we want to create a Fibonacci sequence. We can just do I is less than 10 because this is a very simple problem. And then my array of I is set equal to my array of I minus 1 plus my array of I minus 2. And then we can print this out again. So we're just gonna do another for loop just to save time. And this also isn't like this isn't the best method to what I'm showing you guys right now, but it's adequate enough and it should like combines everything we've learned in this lesson and reviewed. So when we want to print the array, we want to print the value of my array I and then plus um, even. And then we'll want to do the same thing if it's odd. And then make sure you add your if statement. So if my array of I mod 2, because if a number divided by 2 has no remainder, it's going to be even. And if it does have a remainder, it's going to be odd. And then you don't need to save your code here. You can just simply run it. So hopefully this should work if I did everything correctly. And then you see run code goes against the sample test case, and it says congratulations because we have the same expected output as the answer key. And then so once you get that, you can go ahead and submit your code. And it's processing because there's two test cases, and it's accepted. And so now you've finished this problem, so that's pretty good. And then you can go and take a look at is palindrome, which we're not going to explain or go over, but basically you guys should take a crack at that for homework. And that's pretty much all we have for today's lesson. So if you guys have any questions, we'll stay on for a bit more and you guys can ask us, or you guys can message us on Discord or something if the lesson was like too fast or something. But other than that, we're done today. Hi, Josh, you're muted.
Cool. Yeah, so I did go over it, but it was kind of rushed, and probably a lot of people didn't catch it since we were trying to finish kind of on time. So now that we got through all the important ones, we come back and look at this again. So I'm just going to explain through this code line by line. So in the beginning, we create an array called initial values with two elements in it. And they store the number 0 and the number 0. Then we set both of those to be equal to 1. So that will be the start of the Fibonacci sequence. And then down here, remember when you use for I in range 2, 10, it will start at 2 and go all the way up, but not including the number 10. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And that also happens to be the rest of the array that you need. You need an array of 10 elements. So it will be from 0 to 9. 0 and 1 are already taken care of. So all you have left is 2 to 9. So 2 to 9 will be covered here. And appending will add on to the end of the array. Since Python doesn't have a declared size, you can change the size of the array as you go. So we have you will start at 2, you will append a number to the end of the array. So the number you'll be appending first, when you first run through it, will be initial values of I minus 2 plus initial values of I minus 1. And those numbers happen to be 1 and 1. So the first time you get to this part, it will append the number 2 to the end of the list. So now it'll be, let's just make a visual down here, 1, 1, 2. And then the next time you run through it, I minus 1 and I minus 2 has changed since I incremented by 1. So now I is the number 3, since it increases each time it runs through the for loop. So now 3 minus 2 is 1, so index 1 is 1. And 3 minus 1 is 2. Index 2 happens to be number 2, so 1 plus 2 is 3. And following this pattern, you can go on where it adds the previous two elements and append it to the end of the array. And it'll just keep going on until it hits the last one, which is 55. And now down here, we have to print out the actual values as well as whether it's even or odd. So we have, this time we use the while loop to kind of change it up a bit. And for while loops, you have to have a condition. The condition is count is less than 10 and count is set as 0. And remember at the end, you have to increment count so you don't have an infinite loop that count will always be less than 10. Having this increment will ensure that at the end, it'll keep going up until it is greater than 10. And now to check whether the value inside the array is even or odd, you have you first get the data from the array, the element in the array. And to do that, we can use the variable count. Count is also being incremented, and that is why this will eventually reach all the numbers in the array. You'll start at 0 and go all the way up to 9 before exiting the while loop. So index 0, let's take that for an example for now. Index 0 stores number 1, if you remember. And 1 mod 2, is that equal to 0? It is not, and therefore it is odd. So now you could print out the number that's inside that index, so that is 1, and you add the word odd to it. So down here on the output, you can see 1 odd. Second one is the same thing, is also 1 odd. The second index number 2, which is the third element, if you check that against this condition, you realize it is true since 2 mod 2 does in fact equal 0, and that also makes it even. So now 2 will print out even, and then 3 will be odd, 5 will be odd, 8 equals even. So there you have it.